the resolution.
Senators recognized.
First, Madam President, I want to commend the senator from Florida. I couldn't agree more with the importance of focusing on economic growth and developing policies that maximize economic growth. I believe that we could have a tremendous economic recovery underway right now, but we don't. And the main reason is because we've got a dysfunctional government in Washington that is giving us policies that are preventing economic growth. Unfortunately, the budget resolution that our Democratic friends have offer more of the same failed policies and could only result in extending this period of miserable economic growth or lack thereof. Let me talk about a few aspects of this. The first I'd like to talk about is what they want to do on taxes. But before I get into what the Democratic budget proposal proposes for taxes, I think a little historical context would be important. And you don't have to go back to ancient history. In just the last few years, what our Democratic friends and this administration have done is repeatedly raise taxes on all Americans, very much including middle-income Americans, and they propose now much more. Let's go back, for instance, to the Obamacare middle-income tax increases. And I'll just run through a quick litany of some of the tax increases we've suffered through from the result of Obamacare, which raises taxes on people with health savings accounts and flexible spending accounts. It raises taxes on people with catastrophic medical expenses, raises taxes on people who purchase medical devices, raises taxes on people who buy health insurance, raises taxes on people who don't buy health insurance, raises taxes on employers who cannot afford to provide health insurance, raises taxes on people who have family plans that Washington believes are excessive. Is there anyone in America who isn't on one or more elements of this list? I very much doubt it. Fact is, Obamacare was a huge tax increase, added up to $1.2 trillion over 10 years, and it very much included all kinds of taxes that will be carried by middle-income Americans. And then more recently, on January 1st of this year, we had another huge tax increase, and that was about $620 billion over the next 10 years. It was less than 3 months ago. This raises the top rate from 35% to 42.5% effectively when you include the phasing out of deductions. You add in the Medicare increases, and the total top federal marginal tax rate is now 44.8%. By the way, this is the highest rate it's been. Right now, already, it's the highest this rate has been since Ronald Reagan inherited a disastrous tax code from Jimmy Carter. And that was a long time ago. Of course, that doesn't include the state and local taxes, which put many Americans today at a top marginal tax rate of over 50%, where government's taking over half of the income that they're earning. And our friends who are introducing this budget are suggesting that all this isn't enough. We need yet another big tax increase. In fact, we need a giant one, $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years in new additional taxes. And I've got news for you. I don't see how this can possibly be done without significant tax increases on middle-income Americans. I know some folks in this chamber like to suggest this can all be done just by soaking the rich again. We just go back to soaking rich folks again. I don't see how that can work. I'll give you an example of why I don't think that can work. The president laid out in his budget last year his plan for a new whole round of taxes on wealthy Americans on top of the tax increase that occurred 11 weeks ago. And he specified how he would propose doing it. The gist is he wants to limit the value of deductions and apply taxes to income that's not otherwise taxed at the moment. And he'll limit the value of all kinds of deductions. He's laid this out. It'd be all itemized deductions, mortgage interest deduction, charitable contributions, state and local taxes. They want to tax health insurance exclusions and employee contributions to 401ks and IRA plans. Section 199 manufacturing deductions, tax-exempt interest, contributions to health savings accounts. All of these things would be limited, especially affecting wealthy taxpayers under the president's plan, which was laid out in his last budget, the last budget we've gotten from this president. He's chosen not to comply with the rules whereby he should have already produced one for this year. But these tax increases were meant to be in that budget above and beyond the tax increase that he got in January 1st. But guess what? The president's plan for raising taxes on the wealthy, that's $584 billion. That's a lot of money. but it doesn't get you anywhere near the $1.5 trillion that this budget resolution calls for. So since the President has laid out the plan for how they intend to soak the rich yet again, we know that much, but we don't know yet how they're going to raise the other $1 trillion. I can tell you where they're going to do it. It's going to come from the middle class. That's where it's going to come from, because that's where the money is. So what are all these tax increases for? A lot of it's for increasing spending. The Democratic budget would spend more money than the current law CBO budget. Now, I know it doesn't look that way if you just look at the top lines. You got to dig a little bit deeper, but what you discover is the Democratic budget decides to make a totally different assumption about the American presence in Afghanistan than what CBO does. Now, look, I happen to think that we're winding down our presence in Afghanistan, but the budget doesn't decide that. That's a separate matter altogether, and if you want to compare apples to apples, you make the same assumptions about ongoing war expenses, and when you do that, you discover that this proposal actually increases spending at a rate faster than what current law calls for. That's what this budget would do. So it raises taxes enormously, including very much on the middle class, because I don't see any other way you can get there, and it increases spending. By the way, the only operative year of a budget is the first year. The first year, the increase is $162 billion over what we're going to spend this year. That's a 4.6% increase in spending in a year in which inflation is running around 2%. So this is what this plan is. Now, here's what's most objectionable to me about all this spending and these huge tax increases. This is a big part of the reason why we're suffering through the worst economic recovery since the Great Depression. There's no coincidence here. If you look in the post-war era, in the 3 years following a recession, on average, the economy has grown by 14.4%. That's the average growth over a 3-year period after we've had a recession. What's the growth we've had this time? 6.7%. Less than half. This is the worst recovery in our lifetimes. And it's no coincidence. We've had huge increases in spending, and what has that given us? It's given us this feeble economic growth. It's given us an unemployment rate that's been hovering around 8%, and we all know that that does not include the millions of Americans who've left the workforce altogether. They've given up looking for work. Doesn't include the many folks who are underemployed. In fact, we've got fewer people working in America today than we did in 2007. And it never takes this long for an economy to bounce back and create the jobs that were lost during a recession, but it does this time, and it's partly because we're pursuing the wrong policies. Huge government spending, stimulus spending, all kinds of growth in government, and huge tax increases, and the threat of big tax increases. This is a big contributing factor. Higher taxes reduces economic growth, not only because of the money it takes directly out of the economy, but because of the incentives. It reduces the incentive to work, to save, to invest. Whatever's being taxed, there's less of for the person to enjoy who actually created it, and sure enough, you get less of that activity. So the more we raise taxes on work, on savings and investment, the less of it we get. And the other thing is that people, of course, understand that tax increases that are looming in the future, that day will come, and their behavior is affected by it. So huge growth in government spending and the corresponding deficits that we've seen, that has a chilling effect on economic growth itself. Because people understand that's eventually going to get paid for with either higher taxes, or we're going to monetize it and diminish the value of our currency and have inflation, or some combination of those things. And so all of this government, of which this budget proposes still more, this is part of the reason why our economic growth is so meager. Final point I'll make on this as it pertains to the budget, the irony here is that growth is the best way to solve all of our problems. Strong economic growth, not only is it the obvious direct benefit for the families who enjoy it, who benefit from it, the jobs that are created, the higher wages that are earned, the elevated standard of living, the dignity that comes from providing for your family, all of those things are the obvious direct benefits from a stronger economy. But indirectly, the budget, there's no better way to deal with our budget deficit than stronger economic growth. In fact, The CBO tells us that just 1/10 of 1 percentage point increase, sustained increase in the rate of growth over 10 years results in $280 billion of new revenue. Now, it's not completely linear, but imagine, we're so far below the average. If we could just add a full percent, we'd be talking about literally trillions of dollars of additional revenue, smaller deficits, and it would all come from economic growth in the context of people who are back to work and an economy that's booming. That's what we ought to be heading for. Unfortunately, this budget doesn't take us there. I know the senator from Wisconsin is ready to speak, and I want to yield to him in just a minute. Let me just say a quick word before I do about one particularly important amendment that we're going to debate, I think, beginning at 2 o'clock today and vote on hopefully soon. This goes to a small subset of the tax problems that Obamacare and this budget would create, and it's the medical device tax. The medical device tax is one of the more egregious flaws in Obamacare, in my view, and part of the reason is it's such a badly designed tax. Now, this tax is badly designed, in my view, because it applies to total sales. So it's even worse than an income tax increase, which would have been a bad idea. This applies a tax to sales, irrespective of whether a company is making income. So if you're a startup company, if you're a small growing company, or if you're an established company and having hard times, this is a tax that disregards whether or not you're operating in the black and says, we're just going to apply this new tax on your total sales. That is a very, very badly designed tax, in my view. It's particularly a bad idea in a sector that has so many young and growing and startup companies that have so much promise. They're making medical devices that are improving the quality of our lives, saving lives that without these inventions wouldn't be saved. And what we're going to do is slap a new tax on their sales for some of these companies that are just trying to get started, not yet profitable. That's a terrible idea. I know in Pennsylvania it's already, the tax has gone into effect, went into effect on January 1 of this year. It's already costing us jobs, limiting growth, preventing new factories from being built in Pennsylvania to manufacture medical devices. It's also making health care more expensive. We're all consumers of medical devices of various kinds. We're talking everything from surgical implements to prosthesis to hip replacement to ordinary health care devices. And lastly, I would suggest that existence of this tax makes it harder to raise the capital, to launch new firms, and therefore it's going to stifle innovation. I know there's bipartisan support to repeal this tax. I'm very pleased about that. I want to thank Senator Hatch for his leadership for a long time on this. I know Senator Klobuchar has been a great leader on this issue as well. Several of others, Senator Casey and myself, feel very strongly about this. I'm cautiously optimistic that this amendment could pass. I sure hope it does. It'd be a big improvement. And at this time, I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman, the senator from Wisconsin.
Madam President, before my colleague yields and
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you very much. First, I'm speaking and taking